uttered here. We're going to have a couple of ground rules, which we don't normally like to have, but we're going to have a couple of ground rules, and I want everybody to please try and stick to the ground rules. And one of them is that we are all here to hear these very important people sitting in front of us. Everybody is sitting on this panel, and a lot of people sitting not on the panel are experts in race and racism. So please do not come and give us your own presentation. That will be done. The second thing is that as a white person that's in this room, we are happy and we are welcoming of your comments and your statements and your questions. But again, think about the space that you're taking up and think about your ability to allow the voices in this room of people of color to be heard. And most importantly, please make sure that if you are going to bring your white fragility here, that you are ready for us to engage with it. Okay? Thank you very much. Over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for showing up. Thank you to Asanda for introducing me and everybody else. My technical staff wants me to be official and speak like Barack Obama, so I'll try to do that. So first of all, why is Robin DiAngelo in South Africa? This is actually, it comes with a hashtag, why she's in South Africa. Robin DiAngelo is not in South Africa to tell people of color how to deal with racism, number one. Number two, she is not in South Africa because she is the all-knowing female, white female that deals with black issues. Definitely not. Why she is here is because a year ago we started a relationship, me and her, discussing some of the issues that we have in South Africa. One such issue is that people of color, like some of us on the panel, and myself, who see ourselves as people or activists working on racism, have been saying the same things for a very, very long time. But white people refuse to listen to us. We still have to qualify and justify why we have a voice. We still have to justify why we occupy space. Even today, standing in front of you guys, I have to be a specific person. I have to drop some of my coloredness to the side so that I don't offend white people. So that type of thing is still happening in South Africa. And then I said, I know white people better than they know themselves. And you know what white people respond to? Other white people. And not just other white people, if they have an American accent, even better. And I made the choice to say, Robin DiAngelo fits that description. So essentially, I would be of the opinion that her work for white South Africans fits like a glove. If you don't feel that way, I do apologize. You know, like I say, we all have our opinions. Unfortunately, we're not here for yours today. We're here for Robin DiAngelo's opinion. So that is the hashtag. This is our final event. We've been around the country, Joburg, Johannesburg, all the universities. It has been amazing. We've reached thousands and thousands of white people. And I appreciate the fact that white people are willing to come in these difficult conversations. So it's not about putting you to the fore as amazing or any white savior or anything like that. But in order to have the conversation, we need white people to be present. And we appreciate that. Also, on the topic, I'd like to say, a lot of white females are joining us, predominantly. It's not lost on us. We know where you sleep at night. Use pillow talk to have these conversations. It might be a slight turn-off, but I mean, in the end, you can get 10 more years living in South Africa without having to worry about joining a group, I'm staying, or anything like that. On that note, like I said, I would like to thank our partners, number one, for hosting us today, which is the Institute for Social Development at UWC for affording us this and helping me through this event. As Asanda said, Hein Gerwal is on our panel, but is also a great part of helping SJA with getting Robin here. I want to recognize him publicly because we really did the back work in the back to get Robin here, and I'm grateful for that type of support. Thank you, my brother. Danella is sitting in the audience, but Danella is from CBUT and the Transformation Unit. There, I'm going to use the short version. But her with Tumi, Links, and Nix, sorry, and Asanda came together, and a few other people in the background to also contribute to us having this day. So I don't want to say it, but please don't just stick around for the food, but there will be something at the end of all of this. That is how we commonly get people to come to events in South Africa. We tell them about the food and everybody shows up. We purposefully didn't do that. So I want to thank all the partners that have contributed to making this a successful trip for Robin. She has so much more to offer, and that's why I'm glad to announce here that she is back in 2020 and we're doing it bigger and better. I'm circulating a attendance register. Please fill it in because we have to continue these conversations when Robin is gone. And I would like to, through the Social Justice Agency, promote that amongst all of us here so that we continue to work. And now I will be introducing and be saying a little bit about Dr. Robin DiAngelo. Dr. Robin DiAngelo is an affiliate associate professor of education at the University of Washington. In addition, she holds 2 honorary doctorates. She is a 2-time winner of the Students' Choice Award for Educator of the Year at the University of Washington School of Social Work. She has numerous publications and books, and in 2011 she coined the term white fragility in an academic article which has influenced the international dialogue on race. Her book, White Fragility, Why Is It So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism, was released in June of 2018 and debuted on the New York Times bestseller list, where it has remained for over a year. That's a clap. In addition to her academic work, Dr. DiAngelo has been a consultant and trainer for over 20 years on issues of racial and social justice. So before we put our hands together for Dr. DiAngelo, I just wanted to leave the stage with a little anecdote. So while she has been on the New York Times bestseller list for over a year, the one reason why she has not yet made it to #1, and you're going to love this, is because of none other than our own Trevor Noah. That being said, she is now part of our lives and part of South Africa, so don't hate on her. Thank you very much. Robin DiAngelo, guys.
Thank you so much. All right, before I begin, I would like to acknowledge and make 2 disclaimers, right? And the first one is that I will not do justice to the complexity of racism in an hour, or even in 45 minutes, right? I'm well aware of that. Even the language I have available to me doesn't do justice to the complexity. So we'll do our best. And also, I am aware that I'm not from here, right? What I ask is for you to make the necessary translations or adjustments rather than to dismiss out of hand. Right? I think it's important that Edwin said, as a person of color from South Africa, that he sees my work as absolutely relevant to the way that whiteness manifests here. And so I have spoken in many other countries beside the US, and everywhere I go, white people tell me, oh, you're not from here, so you don't understand what it's like here. In fact, we don't really have this problem. Racism is an American problem. And everywhere I go in those same places, black people and people of color say to me, oh my God, please get over here and help us with these white people. Everything you're saying is exactly what we're experiencing. It's as if you're writing the same script. So again, it's on you to make those translations rather than to say it's not relevant. Because while the complexities will vary, the outcome is consistent, and the outcome is consistent inequality between white people and black people and people of color, with white people benefiting from that inequality. So I want to start with a quote by Ijeoma Oluo, who is a young black woman from Seattle, Washington, where I live. And this helps frame the particular focus that I take in my work. So she says, I don't want you to understand me better. I want you to understand yourselves. Your survival has never depended on your knowledge of white culture. In fact, it's required your ignorance. So there are many, many, many roads into arguably the most complex, nuanced, charged social dilemma of the last several hundred years. And all of these roads in are important. This is only one particular way in. And I would never ever say that the white voice or perspective would be the only one you should ever hear. You could never understand racism by only hearing, for example, my voice. But it is the road in that is consistently left off the table. So that when we come together to learn about race or to discuss racism through a class or professional development or whatever it is, we tend to study them. What are their struggles? What are their challenges? What are their triumphs? Who are their heroes and heroines? What do we need to know in order to include them? But what we rarely ever ask is struggles in relation to whom? Triumphs in relation to whom or what? Who am I as I interact across this difference? So we don't study or analyze or expose white culture or whiteness. So let me position myself right now. I am white. Check me out. And part of being white is what I just did, draw your attention to my race as if it had meaning. That goes against all my socialization. I was not raised to see myself in racial terms. I understood that somebody had race, but not really me. And if we're going to be talking about race, we'd be talking about their race, right? Not mine. I wasn't raised to see my race as significant at anything you could know about me. Well, I'm very clear today, after more than 20 years of study, struggle, research, mistake-making, relationship building, and day in and day out, talking to people about race, I'm really clear that I'm white. I have a white frame of reference, I have a white worldview, and I move through the world with a white experience. And it is not just a universal human experience, as I was taught to see it. It is most particularly a white experience in societies that are deeply separate and unequal by race. So while I'm always coming from this position, I want to be explicit about it today. And when I say we, I'm talking to the other white people in the room. Right? So let me say a little bit about what I hope will be valuable for this particular focus for black people and people of color in the room today. What will be valuable to you is that in my short time in front of you, I'm going to name and admit to things that white people will rarely ever name or admit to. And so if you've ever scratched your head wondering, how do they pull that off? Can they really not see this? And why so hostile to seeing this? I will help you with that. How we come to be both so oblivious and ignorant, and also so arrogant in our ignorance, and so resistant. Because you have to navigate us. I'm very sorry to say that I can be seen as qualified to do or lead virtually anything with no understanding of your reality. And quite honestly, no interest in understanding your reality. But from a very early age, you have to know my reality. So I hope that this insider's perspective is useful. I want to acknowledge that I think black people and people of color understand what it means to be white, understand dynamics like white fragility to a degree that I never will. And I want to acknowledge that so much of what I can articulate about what it means to be white rests on years and years of brilliant, patient mentorship from people of color. both those whose works I've engaged with, who are before my time, and those in my life today. Unfortunately, the dynamics of implicit bias is whether you are conscious of it or not. If you are white, you are more likely to be a little more open to being challenged about race from me. And this invokes Audre Lorde's beautiful quote. Audre Lorde was, she has passed. She's a black poet and activist from the US, and she says, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." So how do you challenge a system from within the system? As I stand here in front of you at this podium, granted credibility and authority to my voice, like virtually every other person put in front of us, granted credibility and authority, on race no less, whiteness is being centered and reinforced. For everyone in the room, conscious or not. And I want to acknowledge that because I understand that. And if you don't think I've grappled with it for years and years, well, I have. Where I land, the way that I reconcile that tension, is that it is a both and. One of the ways that whiteness stays centered is by being unmarked and unnamed. And so to decenter it, you have to center it differently. You have to expose it and unpack it, right? And to not use this position, to not use this platform to break with white solidarity, to challenge my fellow white people, for me, would be to really be white. And that would not be acceptable to me. Now, what do I mean when I say it would be to really be white? And I would like to be a little less white. Not mean by that I want to be a little more Italian. Or Irish, or ethnic. I am not going to stand in front of white people and tell you that the answer to racism is we need to go find our roots. Right? To me, to be a little less white is to be a little less oppressive, a little less ignorant, a little less arrogant in my ignorance, a little less certain, a little less apathetic and silent and inactive, and a little more humble and curious and open and vulnerable. Okay, so what are some of the challenges of trying to educate white people about racism? I'm going to give you a great example. I was recently going to give a similar talk to a Google, quite frankly. And before they would sign the contract, the legal department wanted to look at my slides. I was pretty sure I'm not getting that contract if they look at my slides. But they came back to me and they only had issue with one slide, this one. And they actually said to me, could you take the word white off the slide? No. There you go. Let's not name that. Let's not proceed as if that has meaning. My reply, of course, was, you really should have vetted me before you called. Nope. Okay, so every single white person in this room has an opinion on this topic. I've never met a white person who didn't have an opinion on racism, have you? That doesn't make your opinion informed. In fact, I'm going to say perhaps my first controversial thing. If you're white, I'm sure you have an opinion, and I don't know you. I don't know how you build housing in townships for Habitat for Humanity. I don't know your relationships, your stories, your commitments, your struggles. And still I feel confident to say the following. If you are white and you have not devoted years of sustained study, struggle, and focus on this topic, your opinions are necessarily misinformed and superficial. Of course you have them. Of course you've absorbed them. But you cannot have a complex, nuanced understanding of this issue if you are white without a lot of effort, without dealing with a lot of resistance. For example, you can get through graduate school in this country without ever discussing systemic racism, can you not? You can get through law school, you can get through teacher education without ever discussing systemic racism. You might have a cursory overview of apartheid that ended upon Nelson Mandela's release. right? Just the way, you know, racism ended in the U.S. When Martin Luther King came to the scene. All right, so the first challenge for those of us who are white is humility. You don't have the answer. I don't have the answer. I will never have the answer. I see myself as somebody with expertise, but not an expert, which would imply that my learning is finished. Second challenge is if I do a good job, this won't be a completely comfortable talk for the white people here today. The status quo of your society and my society is racism. That is the status quo. That is 24/7, 365. It is not an aberration. It is the norm. It is the default. All your institutions reproduce it. And so I move through societies such as ours in racial comfort as a white person. I move through racist societies in racial comfort as a white person. So I am not here to uphold white comfort. I'm here to unsettle it, because we will not get where we need to go from a place of white comfort. The key is what you do with those moments. And many white people use them as an excuse to disengage. She must have done it wrong because I didn't like it. What I would hope you would use it for is a relatively rare opportunity for inward reflection. Why does this unsettle me? What can that help reveal about the framework of meaning I'm reading this through and how that functions? And there are two places that white people begin to get uncomfortable when I give a talk, whether we can consciously articulate it to ourselves or not. And the first is how often I'm going to say the word white. About 100 times. And we're not used to being seen racially. The second place is that I'm going to challenge a very precious ideology in Western-oriented white settler colonialist contexts. I'm going to challenge individualism. So, I am not going to grant any white person in this room any individuality for the next hour, and you're all going to be just fine. I'm going to generalize about white people for about an hour. And white people, we don't like being generalized about. We want you to know all the things that make us special and different and exception to everything you're saying. Now, we are individuals, of course. I couldn't possibly hold every story in this room even if I wanted to. We are also members of a social group. By virtue of our membership in this social group, we predict whether every person in this room was going to survive their birth. It is profound to be a member of this social group. It has meaning. There is a shared collective experience. We are moving through the same water. Nothing could and nothing did exempt any person in this room from the forces of racism, and any evidence a white person tries to give to the contrary, I can assure you, will not be convincing to black people and people of color. So take that thing that you think is an exception and ask yourself how that sets you up into the racial hierarchy you live in. Because nothing did and nothing could exempt you. And finally, we don't tend to understand the systemic nature of racism, and that is like a fundamental disconnect because we use these terms interchangeably. So I'm going to spend a little time right here laying this down. So racism is a global system. It circulates globally. It has different nuances and adaptations in different contexts, but it consistently results in an unequal distribution of resources between white people and people of color overall, with white people consistently the beneficiaries of that distribution. It is a system, not an event. It certainly happens in moments that we can see and describe, but it's happening, again, 24/7. So let me just be clear. As a result of being raised as a white person, I have a racist worldview. There is no way I do not have a racist worldview. There's no way I have not absorbed it. I also have racist biases, and I have racist assumptions, perspectives, and behaviors. I also have an investment in the status quo of racism because it has served me well around the barriers that I do face. I am not saying white people don't face barriers or suffer. We don't face that one, and not facing it helps us with the ones that we do face. I also have an investment in not seeing anything I just admitted to, which is why I'm the least qualified to determine how well I'm doing, right? I did not choose to be socialized into this system, into these patterns and perspectives, but I was. I do not struggle with guilt, and I'm not looking for guilt. White people, we are not attractive across race when we're feeling guilty. It's a natural response when you come to consciousness about this, but you must work through it, or it functions as a self-indulgent excuse for inaction. What I feel is responsible for the outcome of having been conditioned into racism. And that's actually liberating. It's liberating, because I can just start from that premise and get to work trying to figure out what it looks like in my life and stop defending, denying, explaining, minimizing. Okay? So part of being raised as a white person is to be raised what I think of as racially illiterate. I had opinions, I spouted them freely. I cringe today when I think about it. And part of gaining literacy is understanding the collective systemic nature of racism, but also how different groups are set up differently within it, right? And I want to be really clear that all peoples who are not perceived or defined as white experience racism in both shared ways and in ways that are specific to their groups. And that we have to break that down and understand those nuances, right? Having said that, at this point in my work, I feel very clear that there is something profoundly anti-Black in this world and in this culture. And in the white mind, Black people are the ultimate racial other. And there are two poles. White is here and Black is here. And where you are positioned along that pole shapes how you experience your racialization. And anti-Blackness, sometimes called colorism, manifests in every place on that pole, including amongst Black people. The darker you are, the more compounded is the oppression. And so to illustrate several points I've made so far, it's a system. None of us could be exempt from its forces. It's circulating constantly. And anti-Blackness, I'd like to give you one example. I'm going to start with an example from the US. All right? And this slide will be deliberately dense. We can think about it literally as state-sanctioned organized crime. And in the US, it begins with kidnapping and 300 plus years of enslavement, torture, rape, and brutality, and it carries on. Now, 1/4 of the way into that slide, you see bans on testifying against whites, which made it technically legal to murder Black people in the US. You might ask yourself if it is not still legal. And you are in my lifetime, 1/4 of the way through that slide. Racism did not end when enslavement ended. And if you go about halfway into that slide at employment discrimination, you're now in 2019 with copious empirical evidence. Right? And this is not interrupted by smiling. This is not interrupted by good intentions. Right? All right, so this is the context. Let me just read. Employment discrimination, this is 2019. Educational discrimination, bias laws and policing, white flight, subprime mortgages, mass incarceration, school to prison pipeline, disproportionate special education referrals and punishments, testing, tracking, school funding, biased media, voter suppression, cultural mockery, historical omissions, and unaddressed trauma. This is 150 years out of enslavement. Let's see which ones relate to South Africa. I probably didn't even do justice to all of these, right? So this is everything that is relative in your context, and you are 25 years out of apartheid. You see what's happening in the US because we've never taken account of enslavement. You are 25 years out of apartheid. Most people in this room were born into an apartheid system, and I just have to say this. This is the most powerful thing I want to say to you as an outsider coming here. To say to black people, get over it, is the cruelest, most stunning thing imaginable. So, let me give you an example of systemic racism in culture, right? I don't know who it is, I just Googled white guy. If you have young people in your life, if you have any self-awareness, you understand that pretty much all of us have been deeply socialized and shaped by film, by media, by representation. That most of the implicit bias I have about color, I have absorbed from film, particularly because we live such segregated lives. So we don't have authentic, sustained cross-racial relationships. For all the white people that want to name their acquaintances of color, I would ask you, if you are married, to show me your wedding photo album. We live segregated lives, and so we absorb very repetitive, narrow representations. So those who write and direct film are our cultural narrators. And they shape how we see ourselves, how we see others, and how we see ourselves in relation to one another. Those who write and direct film get to represent the other when they're not in relationship with them and do not know them. And you all absorb American films. Everywhere I go, most of the films playing come from the US. So, of the 100 top grossing films of all time disseminated worldwide, 99 were directed by men and 95 of them white. I keep hearing how, well, it's different here because white people are the minority. Well, white men are the minority in the US. And they vastly control all of the institutions, right? This is a profoundly homogeneous group, and I'm sure they are not in relationship across race. But they depict the other. They represent the other, right? And they get to do it and position themselves as disembodied, neutral, objective individuals simply representing humanity. Richard Dyer is a film critic who talks about that as the God trick. Just proclaiming truth from some disembodied space. So that Mike Lee is a filmmaker who makes films about the human condition, and Spike Lee is a black filmmaker who makes films about black issues. And what that does, always marking Spike Lee's race and not Mike Lee, is continually grant Mike Lee the privilege of objectivity, individuality, and universality. Another example. The research is very, very clear in the US, and I'm sure there is similar research here. By age 3 to 4, all children understand it's better to be white. No child misses the message. I don't believe any child in your society missed the message that it's better to be white. And that is not a singular message that comes from some mean person. This is circulating constantly. Everybody in the room absorbed it. The impact, of course, varies on whether you are or are not white. But all white people internalize superiority from a very early age. Every minute that I sit in your country and am served by black people, I am being reinforced in my position in relation to theirs. It's happening all the time, conscious or not. I spent a lot of time looking for single images that I think capture complex concepts, and to me this is the best image to capture white supremacy. White as the human ideal, the norm for humanity. So this is the Sistine Chapel. There's God creating man. And if we added Jesus and Mary in here, who were not white in real life, but who have been rendered white. If we put Adam and Eve's depictions, Jesus and Mary were historical people. Adam and Eve are biblical characters. But the first humans did come from the continent of Africa. Right? So white as the human ideal, and every other kind of person a deviation of that ideal. And these messages rain down on us 24/7. This is an incredibly brief, me trying to express this in a short period of time. But no one has an umbrella. No one could be exempt. It's on us to figure out how we've been shaped by these forces, not if. We have to change our question from if to how. Because if you ask a white person if they've been shaped, no. All right, well, what is the mainstream definition of a racist? What does the average white person think it means to be racist? Right? It's an individual, always an individual. That allows me to say, not this individual, that one over there, who consciously doesn't like people based on race. Apparently it has to be conscious in order to count. If you ever notice how white people respond when you point out their unconscious racism. And who intentionally seeks to be mean. Also apparently has to be intentional in order to count. So individual, conscious, malintent across race, and there's your racist. And I don't know that you could have come up with a better way to protect systemic racism. Because this definition makes it virtually impossible to talk to the average white person about the inevitable absorption of a racist worldview and the development of racist patterns and investments that we get from living in this society. And I think this definition is the root of virtually all white defensiveness. Have you all noticed any white defensiveness on this topic? Because if this is what I think it means to be racist, and you suggest that I've said or done something racially harmful, well, what I'm going to hear, much less that just by being white, I am invested in and collude in a system of racism, what I'm going to hear is, you just question my moral character. And now I must defend my moral character. We've all seen it, right? So this sets up what I call the good-bad binary. In the white mind, you're either racist or you're not. And apparently in the white mind, nice people can't be racist. So you've got racists are bad. They're ignorant, prejudiced, mean, old for sure, the old people. You know, from the past. Not racist or good. Educated, progressive, well-intended, young, modern. Right? We have to get rid of this either or, and we have to understand the inevitability of this socialization. And I think of it more as a continuum that I am on. And it's less racist, more racist. I'm not going to be off this continuum in my lifetime, and I'm never on a fixed location. In each moment, am I being more or less racist? And there are moments I choose silence. I'm further on the more side. There are moments when I am more engaged and active. You can move me down a little bit. But this is an ongoing, and my position on that continuum is to be determined by people of color. All right. So this is a question that a lot of white people have trouble with. And I'm going to offer you that is not benign or innocent or neutral. That my inability for most of my life to speak to this question has created an atmosphere of hostility for people of color. Because we bring this to the table with us, tables where we're making decisions that affect the lives of other people. So I want to submit that basically, cradle to grave, most white people live in segregation, with no sense of loss. In fact, white people measure the value of our schools and our neighborhoods by the absence of black people. I know exactly what a good neighborhood is, don't you? This is probably the most powerful message of all of white superiority. That the absence of black people is what makes a space good. And that the higher you go, the more white it will be. That is a very, very deep message that we have to look at. Because my internalization of this message is coming out in my pores. So all of this sets us up to be very superficial. And my area of scholarship is critical discourse analysis. So this is the examination of language. And what I want to talk about are the common narratives that white people use whenever the topic of racism comes up. And you'll notice I called them dominant white progressive narratives. I'm not sure if y'all know that white progressives are my specialty. And I suspect I'm in a room filled with white progressives. So what is a white progressive? I'm not talking conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican. A white progressive is basically any white person sitting here right now thinking, I'm not talking about you. Any white person sitting here thinking about all the ways that they're an exception to everything I'm talking about, or who feels qualified to sit back and decide what they agree with and what they don't. A white progressive is any white person sitting here thinking about all the other white people who really should have been here today. And I think white progressives cause the most daily harm to people of color. Okay? Now, there are, I owned my racist conditioning earlier. I am not what I call an avowed racist. There are avowed racists out there, right, who absolutely, openly, explicitly say white superiority, right? I'm sure I can picture some in my country. I imagine you got a kind of an archetype of who that might be here. And I can only imagine that it might be terrifying to interact with a person like that if you are black. But odds are on a daily basis you're not going to interact with a person. You're going to interact with all the people in this room. We are the ones that send you home every day having to agonize about whether it's worth it to try to talk to us, about the slights and the indignities and the undermining, about the smile on the face but a knife in the back, or whether you should just endure it yet again, because odds are if you try to talk about it, things will get worse for you. Right? And if you're white and you're wondering, God, I wonder if it's me that sends my coworker home, yes, it is. just proceed from that premise and then try to figure out how. So these narratives come in two overall categories: colorblind and color celebrate. And this image of a dog here is my metaphor because I actually visualize it this way. And that jetty, we call it a jetty here. A jetty, there are two ways that it signifies this for me. One, how surface and superficial these narratives are, right? But also, if you look at this jetty from up above, it looks like it's just floating on the water, right? But it's not just floating on the water. It's resting on an entire structure underneath that props it up. And everything I'm doing is trying to get us off the top, off that surface level, you know, the answer to racism is personal relationships. And get under there and look at that structure. Because despite all that on top, your outcomes are not changing. Right? So let's look at the top two of the colorblind set. I was taught to treat everyone the same. Do white people here say I don't see color?
Yes.
All right. So, you ready? Not one single person in this room or any room was taught to treat everyone the same. You were not taught to do that. You could not be taught to do that. You do not do that. The research in implicit bias is clear here. You can be told to do it. I could lecture you to do that. But I'm going to lecture you to do something right now. Don't judge, it's not nice. No judging's going on? You don't even want to treat everyone the same in the sense that people have different needs. All right? So when I hear this from a white person, there's a bubble over my head. It's got a few things in it. One, oh, this person doesn't understand basic socialization. This person doesn't understand culture. Wow, this person is not self-aware. And I'm going to give a heads up to the white people in the room. People of color can check me if I'm wrong. When they hear us say this, they're generally not thinking, all right, I'm talking to a woke white person right now. Usually some version of eye rolling is going on. A wall is going up. And Erin Trent Johnson is a black woman I often co-lead with, and she says, when I hear this from a white person, what I'm thinking is this is a dangerous white person. This is a white person who's going to deny my reality. It's just not doing what we think it's doing. So now let's look, let's see some white progressives in here, so you probably with the color celebrate. Let's look at the color celebrate set. I work in a very diverse environment. I have people of color in my family. I'm raising a black child. My children play with everyone. I didn't support apartheid. God, I'm really wondering who did, because I've not found anyone. You'd think it would have been easier to overcome, but okay. The real oppression is class. Yeah, let's get racism off the table and go over to class. All right. So let's look at these first two. I work in a very British environment. I have people in my family. How many of you, in a conversation with a white person on racism, have heard some version of those first two? Okay. And if we're being honest, we probably said some version if we're white. Okay. So let's do a little discourse analysis. It's my area of scholarship. Let's think a little critically about this. When the topic of racism comes up and a white person invokes one of these narratives, they're giving you their evidence, right? This is not even a stretch here, is it? This is the kind of evidence that white people give for why they're not racist. All right, so this is my evidence for why I'm not racist. In order to be good evidence, it has to distinguish me from a racist, right? Otherwise, it's not good evidence. If a racist can do this, so apparently a racist could not work 3 cubicles down from a person of color. Can't have people of color in their family, right? A racist cannot tolerate proximity. I want you to notice how often white people invoke proximity as our evidence we are free of racism. Sociologists actually have a term for this. This is called the inoculation case. I've been near people of color, strip me of my racism. I can walk down the street, pass by people of color, I don't lose my shit. It's amazing. Okay, this is my last talk. I'm slightly looser than I might be normally. All right. So isn't it pretty obvious right here that this is not good evidence? So I'm going to ask a rhetorical question to the people of color in this room. Could a racist work 3 cubicles down from you? Even one who doesn't think they're racist? Even one on the equity team? No. One in the racial justice dialogue group? No. All right, I'm poking a bit at white people in equity work. So let me just say, I'm all for equity work, equity teams, whatever you call them, dialogues. I am all for them. And some of the most gatekeeping, obstructionist white people I've ever had to deal with are in equity work. Yes. The point is, nothing certifies us. And we start to get pretty complacent, right? Okay. I have another rhetorical question for the people of color in this room. Do you have white people in your life whom you love and who on occasion reveal to you a racist worldview? Yes. White people, did you hear that?
Yes.
Could you even be married to them?
Yes.
No. White women married to black men, did you hear that? It's not convincing. It's just not convincing, this evidence. So let me put it this way. This is my point about white women and black men, because this is something we use often as our evidence, as what I call our credentials. And to not even be aware of what that might be like for a black woman to hear would tell me you're not very critically aware about this issue. And it's not that you have to hide that, it's that when we bring it out as our evidence, this is the issue, when we tell rather than show. I am married to a man. He's a cis man. I'm a cis woman. Pronoun she, her. Just trust me. Once he developed fond regard for me, all his conditioning under patriarchy and sexism did not vanish. And on occasion, it surfaces in our relationship. No one would say, because we are in an opposite identity of gender relationship, that we are now free of gender socialization. But the moment there's fond regard across race, white people want to claim we're free of all racial dynamics and bias. Okay? So there's a question that's never failed me in my efforts to unpack, okay, great, then how are we getting the same outcomes? And this question is not, is this true or is this false? We're not going to get anywhere with that kind of question. The question that has never failed me is a sociological question. How do these narratives function? What happens when racism gets on the table and a white person invokes one of these narratives? And when we ask that question, I think we can see all of them exempt the person from any part of the problem, take racism off the table, close the exploration. And in doing that, all of them protect the current racial hierarchy and the white position within it. You don't have to be consciously aware that what you're doing, that is the impact of these. We have to start asking ourselves, what am I saying? What is it doing, and how do I know? So we have to get under here. And this is what I think is under here. The good, bad binary. People often ask me what causes white fragility. It's not a single thing. You put this all together and white people get pretty irrational on this topic. So you've got the good, bad binary, you've got deep implicit bias that we can never admit to, you have individualism, which allows us to exempt ourselves. At the same time, you have this kind of idea of white objectivity, so then we can speak for everybody because we don't speak from any particular place. Internalized superiority, which no white person can avoid having. And on some level, an investment in the status quo of racism, and then the power of segregation to hold it together. So, I want to have you visualize this. I said earlier that this internalized superiority comes out of my pores. And that's a pretty strong thing to say. I want to give you an amplified example, because if you can see it coming out of this group's pores, you might be able to ask yourself, if you're white, well, what's my version look like? All right, and I'm going to use gender right now, because gender is a really easy way for me in. So let's just start with gender for a minute. I want you to imagine that this group of men has been forced to include women. It took decades to force them. So they probably have some resentment. Can you see as they sit there, this is a real committee right now in the US. That's Mike Pence, that's our vice president right there. This is the most powerful committee in my country. Discussing the health care bill. They just got to women's reproductive rights when somebody took the picture. All right, so for all the women in the room, I want you to imagine that they've been forced to have a woman in here in order to help them see if they're doing anything problematic across gender bias. So, for the women in the room, you want to go in that room all by yourself and help those men see their sexism? Sound good? Would it be visceral to you, the embodiment of power? That they've been groomed their entire lives to be at that table? That they see nobody of value missing from that table? And that on some level, there's a range of irritation all the way to contempt at having to include you. So you can only imagine what that woman would be experiencing in that room and what would happen if she even tried to bring up sexism. Okay? So she probably stopped doing it. Right? Now imagine you add 10 women into that room. But you've done nothing to address the consciousness of the men who sat at the table, set the table up, and get to decide if the women even get to come into the table. And what you're doing is you're putting 10 women into a hostile room. And this is what we do. We're going to add, right? We're going to add more, but we do nothing to address the consciousness of the white people that are the bosses, right? All right, so for all the people who identified the women in the room who felt validated by that, because sexism's real. Now imagine this is the room. They really need a woman of color on their board. Women of color in the room? Black women in the room? You want to go in there all by yourself, help those white women see their racism? Oh, that doesn't sound good to you? Do you see that I can be in this room experiencing all kinds of sexism and be in this room perpetrating racism? White women, we must stop using sexism to protect our racism. I am proudly feminist, but that doesn't mean I don't benefit and collude in somebody else's oppression. There's no more a universal sisterhood than there is a universal human experience on the physical plane where we live. Right? So, I got a rhetorical question for the people of color in the room. How often have you tried to give a white person feedback on their inevitable and often unconscious racist conditioning and have that go well for you? Okay, we got a 0 over here. Even white people laugh because we know. Okay? So, I've been asking that question for 20 years, and for 20 years the number 1 response is never, and the number 2 is rarely. White people, you hear that? All right, so this is probably what you get, right? I'm a white woman, so I'll burst into tears. Then everyone will gather around and you'll become the perpetrator and I'll become the victim, right? But all of this, right? And this is what I call white fragility. The inability to tolerate or accept a challenge to our positions, much less naming our position. And the fragility part is meant to capture how little it takes for white people to melt down. Honestly, just generalizing about white people will do it, so please don't send me the email. If I thought it was racist to generalize about white people, I wouldn't do it, so maybe you're missing something, not me. Right? But the impact of our meltdown is not fragile at all, because it marshals behind it the weight of history and power. And it works as a kind of policing. I'm just going to say it. I see white fragility as a kind of everyday white racial bullying. We make it so punitive and miserable for you to talk to us about these issues that mostly you choose not to. And then you get to be with us. In the right numbers, right groups, right credentials. And we're going to claim you for a diversity cover. As long as you don't fundamentally challenge us. Because if you challenge us, immediately you will become a problem. So it's a very powerful way of maintaining one's position, because you don't allow it to be questioned. Right? So, in coming to a close, I want to offer you what could be under that dock that I think would radically transform this, not just at the interpersonal level, but at the institutional level. To start from this premise. Racism is infused in everything, and nothing has exempted me from its forces as a white person. The question is not if I would shape, but how. White people are not I think it's just absurd that white people get to be the objective arbiters of whether racism is real or not. Everyone has bias. Most is unconscious. I have unconscious bias. Thank you for helping me see it. Racism is complex. I don't have to understand it for it to be valid. Given my position, it's actually more likely that I'm the one who doesn't understand the issue and I do not need to lecture you on it. Right? I bring my group's history with me, and it's a history of harm. Yes, I'm Robin, your friend. I'm also Robin, your white friend. And I bring the history into the room with me. I think it's quite rational that you might not trust me until I earn your trust, rather than demand and expect it. And racism hurts people of color, kills people of color. Interrupting it is more important than my feelings, ego, or self-image. And again, it's a short talk. It's 2019. There are so many wonderful resources on what white people can do. And I would say break with the apathy of sitting back and expecting to be handed that and go look it up. Right? So, final note, special final note just for white people in Cape Town. We call them Cape Townians. Cape Townians. This is actually the title of my next book. I'm all for niceness. Niceness is great. Niceness is not anti-racism. It's not ending racism. It doesn't mean you're free of racist patterns and privileges. Because niceness is not courageous. And anti-racism is courageous. It takes courage. It takes strategy. It takes intentionality, and it takes action. So I'm going to close with a single image that I find beautiful to represent the possibility of a transformed world. Thank you.
I just want to say I feel personally dragged because Frozen is my children's favorite movie ever. And she just said that it's racism. So I'm questioning my whole life right now, just so you all know. Thank you so much. That was powerful, amazing. I'm not even going to try and summarize. I think it's a good thing that we have a live stream, because if there are things you missed in that conversation, I want you to go back and listen some more, because I just went to church and I'm hoping everybody here feels like they just went to church. Sorry, that was actually not cool for people who are not Christian. What I mean to say is, I feel like words were spoken that really arrived at me. I feel a lot of affirmation as a person of color, particularly because we've been having these conversations, and I really hope now that you have a white American doctor telling you the stuff, it's going to hopefully land. And hopefully you're going to have these conversations with all the other white people that you were thinking should be in this room. So that as the black people in this room, as the people of color in this room, we don't have to try to have those conversations and then be faced with, you know, the denialism. I really like that slide. I think I'm going to keep it and just send it to all my WhatsApp groups. I will no longer be tolerating the following responses. That's going to be my standard. Thank you very much. So I think that Robin did a very great job into bringing us to the conversation that we want to have here today, because we thought long and hard about what do we really talk about, because Robin has been all over radio, you know, she's had like a number of conversations. So we thought we wanted to elevate the conversation even further. And I like that she did mention that, you know, white women are some of the most problematic. Or maybe I'm just paraphrasing, that's just me saying that. So what we thought we would do is, we're going to talk about the ways in which white fragility manifests at a practical level, right? So everybody's thought about, you were like, tick on the crying, tick on the denialism. But I want us now to look under, I like that example of looking under the jetty. And I want us to talk about the structural and systemic ways in which people respond to racism, right? And in which particularly white progressive, as she calls them, or white liberals, as we sometimes call them in South Africa, respond to the issue of racism. And this is particularly about women, but not only about white women. And I'm glad to see, obviously, there's so many white women, because this is the perfect audience. So we've got Nix, Hani, we've got Dumi, and we've got Robin. They are all going to be answering our questions during the Q&A, but I'm going to give them 5 minutes each to, first of all, just like ground us in everything that you've heard, but also in our particular focus that we want to have today. And then we'll have questions from the audience. So I'm just going to hand over to you. And please, before you start, just give us a little bit about yourself and how you're coming into this. Thank you.
Hi there. I'm Nix Mfene. Just the pronouns are they, them. The position I come from, so I did my PhD on Johannesburg Pride. After the 2012 moment, I'm not sure if any people know about it, but essentially Joburg Pride fell apart after predominantly white leadership met black bodies lying in the street protesting against hate crimes. And that kind of pulled up this moment for me to understand what was happening within the LGBTIQ community. And so I ended up doing a historical analysis of Joburg Pride and going all the way back to 1990. And started to notice patterns that existed there around essentially whiteness protecting itself, but claiming to be progressive. And most of us have been given permission by our idea of the Rainbow Nation. So I looked at what it meant for the queer community and the LGBTIQ community, I mean, being intentional, and how they had come to participate in the Rainbow Nation narrative and protect themselves from challenging their own racism, essentially. During that, so essentially, in some way it was a grounded theory PhD, so I wrote from my own position as a white South African, having to live in South Africa, but also coming from a space in which I had essentially been socialized. So I had been born into the space, and you can have a choice, but you can rile against what you are being woven into. And I had a really intense coming out process 17 years ago, so 15, and my first instance of homophobia, or hate crimes, was familial based. But over years, I've been questioning what had held it or made it possible. And so this is, we did speak about that. We're going to speak to lived experience. So yeah, so I'm just going to share, and you can let me know if this is terrible for you. I'm sorry. But essentially, I had realized that which had created my parents, and particularly the apartheid state and the way of thinking about whiteness, but also the socialization that my father in particular had to go through as part of the army, had created this othering or this approach to particular bodies. And at the time I understood it as the queer body. But as I went along an academic journey and an activist journey, I realized that what was happening was it was around the protection of the white identity and the white race. So keeping it pure, apologies in advance for problematic old thinking, but like the whole idea around, and I'm not Afrikaans, so swart gevaar, pink gevaar, rooi gevaar, so like the black danger, the red danger, and the pink danger. And these were all woven together. And one particular moment really highlighted it for me. I think that was just the start of the PhD process. I went home and I told my family that I was going to be leading a report on the state of homelessness among LGBTIQ youth, and it was a UN report, and it was the Nairobi office that had requested that I do this for them. And my father's response to that was not, and I was anticipating the homophobia at first, but it was a racist and derogatory response and then a homophobic or queerphobic derogatory response. And that it came through that channel made me realize, and I mean, I'm glad it happened because I was able to see what I was dealing with, but also having to start that journey of understanding how to untangle myself from that and knowing that I will never untangle myself from it, but that it is the journey that must happen. Yeah, it was so interesting, that link for me between race and queerness and the fear there and what we were trying to protect in that moment. And that it was so threatening to him that he was able to threaten verbally my life because this body working with black bodies was a threat to white bodies. You know, and having to spend time in the last while, you know, I have this guilt about speaking about it, and it's like, am I being a race hater by speaking to whiteness, by highlighting this? Am I further estranging myself from my family? What if they hear about this? You know, all of this plays out. But it's also the sort of thing that if I don't speak it, then we continue in the space. We continue with the silence, and then I am complicit. And I'm going to wrap up now because I think I'm heading toward that. But an example of that silence and meanings challenge is recently I was hospitalized, and I took the book with me. And I had this moment where I had the book out, but I would put it away when I knew my doctor's rounds were, because I didn't want to deal with a white man having to have that violence and having to explain to a white man while I was reading a book on white fragility, and let alone that I was going to be participating in the panel, because I mean that would like really take it to the next level. But I realized that what was happening there was that I was worried about my care being compromised. And that was very interesting for me, and it's a very difficult thing for me to kind of sit with and go, okay, but why, where's this coming from? Why would I not challenge this space? Yeah, and that's pretty much kind of what I enter this space with.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Untitled. I'm from here. I was born about 50 meters from here. Basically was brought up on this campus. I teach at Stellenbosch University. I've taught here. I've taught at Stellenbosch at Student of Economics. And in a sense, I mean, I feel I can find myself a scholar of development. See a number of my students in the audience here. And I actually want to relate my experience as an academic to this concept of racism. Also come from a black consciousness background. So I'm not going to say I don't see race. I don't see why race is such a big issue to people. But be that as it may. So first example that comes to mind, 2013 was my second or third year of teaching at UCT. And I usually for the first lecture of my component, I go in early just to compose myself and sit among the students. So the one year I got up and stand behind the lectern, and there was a young individual, historically and pleasantly advantaged male individual, who said, just get away, then the lecture is still coming. My credentials are constantly questioned. Some of my students would ask me where I came up with the ideas that I'm bringing about. I bring out class to teach at postgraduate level. So these are not immature schoolboys, people who have degrees and still think that because I'm a black man who smokes weed, I don't know what I'm talking about. Another example I can think of was the Saturday past. I played cricket for a club in Athlone, Avondale Cricket Club, and we played against Malmö, which is also a predominantly white team that came to play. The way they approached us was like with, not so complete and utter disdain, but close to it. Thought they were just going to basically demolish us. Yeah, that didn't happen. We scored a massive total. Then when they went to bat, they started cheating. I'm the wicketkeeper, so I started making some comments. And white people don't like hearing about white privilege. And that made most of them throw their wickets away because they were so upset. So for those of us who are in sport and you are in a position where you need to intimidate your white colleagues, just remind them of it. But I think this type of conversation is important. I mean, I feel I've actually learned quite a lot from listening to a white person, acknowledging, admitting, and trying to come up with a solution. I've also always thought, well, okay, most of my white friends are non-racial in terms of their outlook, the worldview. But those types of small instances where it does come through, I think for us as people of color, let's just get over that and go on. And I think in South Africa we make too much about the agency-based or the type of incidental racism. I don't care, you can call me what you want to call me. I'm not going to engage with it or get upset with it because if you're going to call me a hotbot, obviously your cognitive level of functioning is below mine, so I'm not going to engage you. I've never felt inferior to white people, so those of you who think that I should be showing some inferiority, I'm sorry. That's not how I was brought up, and I know I'm not. I don't actually have much more to add. My time is almost it. So I'll pass on to Jimmy.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so there's plenty of space here in the front for people who are at the back and don't have a place to sit. If you are willing to do the walk down here, there's plenty of space. Yeah. So you ended the slide with that niceness is not anti-racism. Just the other day, I was working on a document on my laptop, but I couldn't focus at home. So I decided to get on my bike. I cycled to Mug and Bean where I could have bottomless coffee and not have to pay for 2 coffees. So I go to Mug and Bean and I'm sitting and I'm having coffee and this white old man sits on my left and a white old woman sits on my right. The white man is having red wine, the white woman is having white wine. And now I'm doubting my life choices about this coffee. And I decide to also have a glass of wine just to balance things out. So I have this glass of wine and something in me also sometimes, something in me, I turn around to the white woman and I'm like, thank you for the peer pressure because I'm actually happy with having the wine. Like, it's because of the two of you that I'm also having the wine. And then we get into a conversation together, very, very nice woman. We get into a conversation together. And very, very nice, you know, we start talking and we start to, and now even everyone else at Magdalene is looking at us and there's smiles on their faces. Everyone's like, oh, this is so, you know, this is beautiful. And then she says, my helper, who's also my child, wants me to get a husband so that she can have a father. Now my mother's really like, helper, child. I don't understand. Then she starts crying. Full tears. Everybody's still looking at this interaction. And now the smiles are even bigger because now she's crying. This is an emotional kind of. Then she says, I'm so sorry that I'm crying. It's just that I really love black people. And animals. And the Lord. I did not know what to do with myself because now everybody's looking at this exchange. Everyone's smiling, you know, we just won the Rugby World Cup, this is beautiful. So I just looked at her, I packed my bags, and I went and sat outside because, I mean, what do you say to that? reflecting about this moment, I realized that in the past, I would have handled that moment quite differently. And that is because even black people have been socialized to not cause race-based stress for white people. We have been socialized to do that, and there was a time where that even came naturally for me. In that moment, in the past, I probably would have given her a hug, told her it's okay, or whatever, because that's also my socialization, to help white people not lose their shit. Right? When I go into a white space, I'm the one that needs to do all the work to fit in and assimilate. A white person goes to a black space, everybody morphs themselves to make sure that the white person is comfortable, right? Because this is our socialization as well. So we also have some work to do around this. And I know that like a lot of the white people around me are struggling right now because I've recently found my freedom of speech. I realized this. I mean, this was hard for me to admit to myself that freedom of speech around white people is something that I've never had. Because I've always had to think through what I say, how I'm going to say it, make sure that I disarm my body so that white people are comfortable. So I've never, this was hard for me to swallow for myself, that like, I have never had the freedom of speech around white people. And now that I do, they're not coping, but it's fine. It's fine. And I like that you focused on white women in particular. Because I think there's a way in which, it's not to say that white men are not harmful, Jesus, but there's, white men are, they basically predictable in a lot of ways. Whereas white women, you never know the angle that's going to come at you. You just never know. And I think one of my difficulties with progressive white women in particular has been dealing with white women emotions, because white women's emotions have a strong currency. White women emotions have a strong currency, a currency that is often detrimental to black people, depending on how they decide to use their emotions. If a white woman is racist to me, and I tell her, and she cries or something, the best case scenario for me in that situation is that we are both wrong. That's the best case scenario, right? Because white women have this ability to create an emotional vortex that swallows everyone in its wake, right? A white woman's emotions will call up the white man to be the bulldog that fights for them, even the black man against the black woman. And that's what makes the space so difficult to navigate. And now, even terms and tools that are used that are supposed to be progressive and help us sort some of this shit out, white women have learned to weaponize these same things and have made them part of their, I think they call it range of defensive moves. Right? Examples. Intersectionality. The ways in which white women will use the concept, intersectionality is very important, but they found ways of using that so that they don't have to, feel like they're the ones who are always the bad people, and they've used that to hide behind not talking about race. So no, let's rather look at the gender question. Oh my gosh, we're all oppressed as women. No, let's talk about class. What's the situation here between you and Asanda? Asanda's a little bit more middle class. You are low class. What's the dynamic there? Anything to not deal with their own racism, right? Even the term white fragility. But I don't know, did you read that article by Robin? She talks about white fragility there, and it's so important, and it's so problematic, but what I'm doing right now, that's not white fragility, it's my authentic self. So almost like, what do you say to that? the importance of being able to name some of what we've been going through has been very important for black people. But then when they name it, now what do? Because now I can't say no, but now you've been fragile because you've already told me about that and told me how it's not what's happening right now. So I'm left in a position where I just have to sit there and take what you're doing because you've disarmed me. You have disarmed me, and this is some of the complications around navigating space with progressive white women, because I mean that's my sort of experience at the moment, dealing with white women. Okay, I'll stop there. Sorry.
I know that there's more, so I'm going to give you an opportunity to get into it a little bit. So I think now I'm going to give our panelists about 2 minutes each just to learn a bit more. And I'm picking up from what you were saying, which is, and it's something that really stresses me out and makes me really upset. This issue of the ways in which intersectionality, which is meant to be about the recognition of the fact that there are spaces in which we are empowered and spaces in which we are not empowered. But that very word, that very concept, that very term has become bastardized, politicized, weaponized against black people because, you know, I understand that there's a racial element to this, but, you know, we have to talk about LGBTQI community. We have to talk about gender non-conforming people. And I want to bring you in next just to tell us a little bit about, like, you know, that kind of experience of being constantly dragged in as arsenal for people who want to make arguments, right?
I'm trying to figure out how to come at this. So yeah, that's something, I mean, so I've been quite critical of Joburg Pride, but also been super critical of Cape Town Pride. And a while ago, it was 2016, 2017, one of the theme for Pride was, when you think about it, I think they did eventually backtrack, was gay, proud, and colorblind. And this has kind of been like, but it was something to be proud of. I mean, it's also coming along, gay, proud, and then colorblind, and that you're progressive, that you're not terrible, and that, but it's also about being a marginalized identity, and that's what makes it really difficult to critique, and it's something that I've really had to lean into during the process of kind of doing this work, and really not being friends with the community, is calling it out, you know, and saying even within the LGBTIQ community there are issues. You know, just as there is same-sex domestic violence, we need to be talking about what is happening in these spaces. And that doesn't mean that we negate what their experiences are, but that we are just adding this, well, making more visible the complexity of it, really. But in terms of just kind of, I don't know, can I just squirrel something back? As I was listening, I remembered what one of my examiners said in my report. So my PhD report, I got 3 examiners, great, first 2 passed, groovy. The third one, also assuming that I understood Afrikaans, wrote in my report a 12-page report. Everybody else, you know, like 3 pages, very nice stuff. But basically it was an essay on not all white people. And that my data had been compromised by myself in the world, and that I had gone through this whole ethics. It was a PhD in history, so the participants were named, and we had gone through all of this with the ethics committee. But this person had said that the PhD, and that the ethics committee needs to review the PhD. So the night before the changes were due in order to graduate, I was busy dealing with the ethics committee, who wonderfully, university still known as Rhodes, basically said, look, if this person wants to say racist stuff, let it be known and go ahead. I don't see why this has come all the way back here. And the closing paragraph in that report from the examiner was, I'm sure the student will put this down to me being a straight white woman. She named herself. And I had this moment, I was like, yes, absolutely. I mean, this is what I will do with this, and I still need to write the paper in which I have my feelings about this. But the idea at this, this person was protecting whiteness, and knew that I would know too, but also assumed that she was doing me a favor by telling me about not all white people. It was a very, very weird moment. I'm not sure if I even answered what you asked me to answer.
I think you've answered the question sufficiently. So, as a man, I'm sure there must be moments where your gender gets prioritized. That, I know I'm a white woman, and I think that, your patriarchy right now is the problem here. So let's talk about that, and let's not talk about my racism. Do you want to share a little bit about that kind of experience?
Okay, so as a disclaimer, I'm not a feminist, but only because I haven't read enough feminist theory to call myself one. I'm a supporter of the cause of all marginalized individuals, irrespective of any difference we ascribe to ourselves. But anyway, so, excuse me. You an experience of dealing with patriarchy, or?
For any kind of, you're just talking about institutionalities and the ways in which it gets weaponized. Because as a black man, I would think that there are experiences of conflict with white women where your patriarchy gets pitted against their racism and that kind of
Okay, now on a personal level, that really happens. I mean, with me. I just don't engage it. But if I can think of, from my personal perspective, where to check myself acting in a patriarchal manner, is with my role as a father. And my kids are 14 and 10. My son is not the most inspired student. So the way I tried to address it was to speak to him in a more engaging manner, trying to explain why I feel it's important that the school and all that. And then he came after the next exam, and then I just went totally like old man, Christian man style with the, if you don't pull off your socks up, and I mean, it's such an easy go-to thing for men, violence. When I've recently written something about all this hero worship that we have in society is actually a way to negate the importance of the role that women play in society. And the point I was making there was this whole Jake Scrabble type of mythology that's been created. I have cousins, girl cousins, who are infinitely more capable academics than I am. I mean, two of them have PhDs from UKZM, one from the University of Richmond, Nelson Mandela University. I have another cousin who has 3 master's degrees from the 3 universities of the Western Cape. And all 3 of them are doing exceptionally good work. But my uncle, the father of the 2 doctors, Dr. Gerber, said, you must finish your PhD so that there can be another PhD in, after my father was the first. And he said, and you, this is my Uncle Sam, both your daughters are Dr. Gerber. No, but they married, they're not Gerber. So that type of thinking is what we must try to break down. And I think this type of thinking about what family entails is also a result of whiteness. And the philosophical foundations, this idea of liberalism, let me just be quite honest, I think liberalism is the biggest lot of for South African society. You cannot be a liberal in a society that is inherently unequal. So that is basically, I think, the point.
Thank you very much, Dumi. Your thoughts now are welcome. Okay, so thank you so much to our panelists. We're going to hear from a little bit later. What we're going to do now is we would like you to turn to the person next to you, and you're gonna have a very short time. It's gonna be 2 minutes, so that's 1 minute each, right? And you can talk to them before you now put up your hand for the Q&A. You can talk to them about what are your initial feelings and thinking about what's happening. So what's the freshest thinking that's coming to you right now, having heard Robin, having had the panel? And then once that's done, we are then going to engage as a bigger group. So I just have only one rule, right? Which is that if you happen to be a white person paired with a person of color, please do not make them, we are colors now, eh? Please do not make them carry your emotions or do the emotional work or do the emotional labor for you. So yes, share your feelings, but don't be like expecting them to give you hugs because you're crying. And I want to challenge the people of color in the room to not respond to the white fragility that may come your way, because this is what we need to start practicing, guys. Seriously, how do we respond to white fragility when you present? So you've got a minute each to have the conversation, and then we're going to have a Q&A with everybody, okay? because we're also trying to avoid like mini meltdowns. So what we're going to do now is I am not going to ask for feedback from individual people about what you've discussed, but what I am going to do is we're going to do 3 rounds of questions, 4 people at a time, because that's what gives us time. So we're going to start with the first round. We're going to take 4 questions. So if you don't get an opportunity in the first round, there's a second one and there's a third one. So please stay comfortable and listen for a little bit. And yeah. Oh, it looks like we already have hands in the room. Okay. There's a lot of men, so I'm going to like cut. One of you has to put their hand down, unfortunately. Thank you very much. Next round, I will come for you. Okay. So we've got you there at the back. That's the 3rd hand, that's the 4th hand. And then we'll come to you guys right at the back in the 2nd round, okay? So it's here, that's number 1. Yes.
I would like to just, I found one comment, the gentleman in the middle, about moving on. I find that very problematic. As a colored person, I find that mostly this is said within the colored communities. So I think that what happens, why I find it problematic is that we need to remember where we come from, and that as colored people, we've always had more benefits than black people. And so it's easier for us to say we need to move forward. But the other problem I have with that is that this gives white people the opportunity to say, look at him, he's moved on. What is wrong with you? We are 20 I don't know how many years post-apartheid. You guys can't be still banking on that. The problem is that justice will never happen. And so I want to challenge that thinking, that we need to stop thinking like that.
No mansplaining.
I know you've heard it, but you have to respond.
Thanks, my name's Leanne. I want to ask Tumi in particular, sorry, because I think it might help us. I was at Robin's talk at UCT where I have unfortunately work, which is a white liberal institution. My personal experience of listening to the same talk here, I was an undergrad here, this is a majority black space, I could feel, I was crying half the time, basically. Whereas at UCT where I work, I had to perform something else in that space because it was majority white. But I left that space speaking to the black colleagues who were there. We all had the same reflection. This was someone sharing deep activist and intellectual work around racism and entailing herself in it. We walked away from that thing and the white people said nothing in the Q&A. And I walked away from there feeling, what did we just perform? So my question to Tumi, who's done a master's in social psychology, on how to talk about racism in diverse groups. If I got your conclusion, or one of the conclusions was, we end up leaving diverse spaces in South Africa with the white people feeling comfortable. So you've done a great job of creating discomfort from there, but it seems to me the white people don't entail themselves. And that is not to say speak about your brother or your sister or your whatever. How do you entail yourself with a personal story that makes you confront and be witnessed? You have a beautiful opportunity here. So Tumi's going to hopefully help us with that. Because she's thought about this, and we've been doing this dialogue for 7 years, and we're coming to the same roadblocks.
Thanks to the panelists and Robin. You know, it's the first time I'm kind of engaging with your work now. Your work is kind of very enlightening and interesting. So I kind of, you know, looking at your, just engaging with your work, some authors and activists came to mind, such as the work of Fanon and Steve Biko and Marcus Garvey, etc. You know, from a more kind of an Afrocentric perspective, debunking racism. but also speaking for like kind of equality, advocating for equality, and not only just for one race, but I look at the work of other authors like your John Locke and Thomas Hobbes and those guys who were fundamental in constituting and consolidating racism. So my comment, I'll be brief, my comment is that, my view is that white people should actually lead the way in combating racism and social inequality, as well as this whole thing of the Bible being distorted, this white idea, ideal figure of, some biblical persons that are being depicted as white in the Bible. And then also because of this whole social inequalities that why white people should lead the way in combating racism is because the majority of the white generation within the current epoch, they have benefited from the wealth of colonialism and apartheid, and they are still benefiting. And so therefore the economics come into play, and therefore, such as the Native Americans and the Black South Africans, etc., the list could go, we could go on, deprivation of wealth. And so my question to you would be, what methodology would you propose or consider to be implemented in order to combat racism? Thank you.
Thank you. That's an entire There's a fourth person there. Oh, yes.
Thank you. You spoke about intersectionality and the weaponizing thereof, and my question is around, I think it's possibly at this point still a Black Lives Matter, US Black Lives Matter concept, but the concept of white incarceral feminism and how that is used against black men. Thank you. If you can put some light on.
Okay, so thank you for your questions, of course. I just think because Leanne spoke a little bit about something, I just want to give a bit of contextual background, which I should have done at the beginning. So Daniela, Martina, and Julia form part of a group of 6 women who meet monthly, supposed to be monthly, to talk about race and racism in South Africa and the ways in which it affects our lives. We also run a Facebook group called This Dialogue Thing, which is available on Facebook, and that if people are interested can join. And we spend, as I said, so much of our time talking about racism, and so much of our time particularly talking about the ways in which whiteness keeps finding a new way of presenting itself. So when we figured out white fragility, there's another word that's still coming that's going to describe the new thing that people are now doing now that we figured out white fragility and called it out. And so it's very important to also understand that, like, this thing is a continuum that continues and that continuously changes, which is why we decided to tackle particularly the issue of intersectionality, because it's the latest form of morphing, the latest form of, like, we are no longer fragile, what we're doing is we're being intersectional. And so we need to be very woke and awake to the ways in which the morphing happens. So I'm going to be a dictator, and what I'm going to do is, I'm going to tell you who's going to answer what question. Yes. And then if there's anybody over and above who wants to add, please do so. So I'm going to start with you, Tumi. What was the question? Why people leave diverse spaces comfortable? What are the ways in which we can stop this?
You just said, not sure. Not sure what that was. But I mean, yeah, that's a big question, as you know. And it's a question that we have not quite ourselves figured out the answer to. But I think what tends to happen in these kind of diverse spaces where we talk about racism is that we very superficially declare a space as safe and equal and all of these other things. And I think one of the things that has been useful in our group, and this actually comes from you, is making the implicit explicit. So putting everything on the table as is. And how you deal with it, we will see. But not this kind of like footing around issues. Putting things as they are on the table. And that it's not us sitting with discomfort there on the side and other people having the best time of their lives. Right? And also, just because a space is diverse does not mean that it's not white. Right? You can have 2 white people and that space still be white. Because we have a tendency of prioritizing white people's feelings. Yeah, I hope it's good.
Okay, and then I'm going to head over to you, Robin, about the entire university that you must establish to explain what methodology you think would be useful for ending racism.
In 2 minutes.
Well, just before I answer, there's a few things that have been building, and I just want to say, yes, all whites and only whites. Okay? I just want to make that point because I did not make the point that there is no such thing as reverse racism.
Yes.
Right? Everyone has bias. When you back my group's bias with the kind of power that can accomplish what was on those 2 dense slides, we're talking about racism there. Would also like to name the black scholar, legal scholar who coined the term intersectionality, because we've been talking about intersectionality, and that is Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. And I would like to also ask any white person right now with their laptop open to close it or to go and do your work outside the room. Because regardless of what you want to tell us about why you're on your laptop, it sends a message. And we have to start paying attention to how we inhabit space. As far as the methodology question, that's the $1 million question, and part of me just was like, I don't have the answer. If we had racism figured out, we would be somewhere else. Maybe the closest I can offer is that we cannot get there from the current framework, the current paradigm that says this is individual acts only by conscious, intentionally mean people, and we have to radically change what we understand it is. And internalize a very different set of assumptions. And there are so many strategies to get to that, and they're all necessary. I feel like my skill is as an educator, perhaps a consciousness raiser. There are people whose skills is organizing and activism, right? We need all of it.
Thank you. So I'm going to throw the difficult one about intersectionality and recognizing and I think you studied a little bit of white feminism.
A lot of but yeah. So, not really coming from intersectionality. So yes, we need to speak about how things intersect. But what I have found useful for myself, and it's what you did in terms of gender and sexism, is to think about my experience as a trans queer body. So every day I'm confronted with being in predominantly cis-het spaces, so cisgender spaces, and my body is the other body. And you may not know that my body is the other body, but I'm aware that my body is the other body, and it has to. I have to hear you use a particular pronoun for me. I have to hear questions about, I don't know, whether I'm going to spawn or not. Why is my chest so flat? What am I? All sorts of things, and I have to go home with these questions. And I have to sit with that violence, and I have to, I'm still thinking about the first day a week ago where I had to tell my doctor about having had gender-affirming or gender-comforting surgery, and that interaction, and having to do the work of explaining my gender identity. And it's still with me. It's going to be with me a good while down the line. And I think about that, and I think about how I carry it, but I know that the persons that I have interacted with don't necessarily carry that with them into their spaces. They can put it down after they've interacted with me, after they've given me their opinion. And then what I do for myself is I come back to it and I go, how am I doing that as a white person? I have the privilege of putting it down. I can walk into my space, and sure, it might linger with me, but it will pop up. You know, it's not this thing that lives with me in the way that my trans-queer experience lives with me. It's raw. You know, every day I have to get ready to go into the world and be confronted and receive this kind of gender attribution, really, or this hailing that I don't recognize. And what I've kind of been grappling with, really, because there's this need to know all the answers, do all the work, be a good white, really just get in there and have the answer. Is knowing that there is no answer, and that it's about leaning in and doing that work and being uncomfortable. That has really been one of the most difficult spaces for me to be, is being uncomfortable. But I like the idea of, like, if you're not uncomfortable, there's no discomfort, you're not growing. But it is also very hard. But also then I think about, as soon as I start getting into that little pity cycle of, like, oh my god, this is so difficult, this whole, like, I hate being a white person. I went through many years in my early 20s especially, really hating it. But, having the privilege of hating that, and that's, I can put that down. Maybe I'm having a good white day, I don't know. Every day is a good white day. But, that's what that is, and having to really think about that and be willing to do that work. And I come at that from the queer experience in order to be able to see that. And I can't actually imagine whether I would be able to do that work if I hadn't had that experience as the way in.
The last question was around moving this idea of needing to move on being problematic, particularly because it gives white people a reason to now make you a hero and an example. Transcending color.
Thank you. I want to start with, I don't remember saying that we must move on. But I think in the context of moving on, I would never use that as a way of thinking for going forward. There can't be moving on if we don't deal with what is holding us back. So I think that where I may have been misinterpreted, I feel we shouldn't just want to challenge interpersonal racism, but we should be working towards breaking down this institutional racism or the structures that are in place so that we can have a true structural transformation which promotes equity, which has true democracy, where each person's voice is as audible as Harry Oppenheimer or the Ruperts. And so this ideal of democracy is also a farce. If you have money, you have more rights. I also just wanted to respond to your unapologetically claiming colored. I am unapologetically colored, but I don't define myself as colored. I grew up in the colored area. I ran away from gangsters on my way to school, like other coloreds do, and I make that example to my white students. White privilege is never having to run unless you are famous for. Have you been chased on a daily basis by a crazy guy called Kanal? He's coming up in jail soon, I shouldn't. But so the whole idea of moving on, we can't move. Where are we going to move to if we don't have a different way of thinking about this? Because the way we've been approaching it has obviously not been working, and Robin's been pointing that out. So I think this methodology question that was asked is important, but we first need to change our worldviews. This social ontology that has been created for us, atomistic view of how society operates. And economists are largely to blame for that. This ideal of being scientific, that it's a real science, we want to measure stuff. Economics deals with personal interactions of humans, and I think that's what makes it different to other types of social systems of other species on the planet. So things don't just happen like in the laboratory or with physical systems. We have agency. We can decide to do things differently. And that's, I think, what we need to do. We don't just have to be racist because our mothers taught us to be racist. Right? So, because something is acceptable, it is our culture. Apartheid was the lawyer. It was, you know, it was institutionally entrenched that certain people are better than others. Right? Certain hierarchy. So I don't think that intersectionality and the class issue especially, I mean, I come from a bit of a more critical box type of background. It is important for us to look at class. But in South Africa, class and race is the same. How many poor white people do you know? How many poor black people do you know? And if we look at it statistically, and the reasons for why the situation is like that. So I don't see myself as historically disadvantaged. Both of my parents are university graduates. Most of my family went to university. I have a job. My wife has a job. We live in a big structure. So just because we are black doesn't make us disadvantaged too. And I think that's what we must, as non-whites. And I use that term now in the context of this space. But I've come up with the term non-blacks. Because in terms of blood consciousness, we're not white, you're black, right? So why should we position ourselves in the context of the other? So I am othering the status quo. So I'd like to thank the non-blacks that are here today for coming and to engage. Because after all, Africa is for everyone. So we should try to be as African as we can be. And that doesn't mean cultural appropriation. It means positionality. You are not European. You are African. Light-skinned Africans, not Africans nonetheless.
I'm sorry, light-skinned Africans, it's getting heated up in here. Okay, so 4 people. Ooh, I feel like this is the lotto thing. Okay, 1. Pardon? It wasn't answered. I'm aware of that. It's at the back of our minds. We'll answer it. Sorry. I am very aware. You? EFF t-shirt. Oh, cap.
My hand is up.
Yes, there, and yes, there. And then we'll take the other side in the last round. Sorry. Okay. Oh, and just like a very short reminder, ask a question or make a statement, please.
Hello everyone. My question is directed to Hein or Hein. You just said we can't move on unless we address what is holding us back. I can only speak from my own experiences as an African. And I believe it's tribalism that's actually the issue that's holding us back. So if you look at the American slave trade, for example, African chiefs from different tribes sold slaves in exchange for weapons. And if you look at Zimbabwe, for example, the Shonas massacred the Ndebelés in Rwanda. And it seems like that division between Africans is weaponized. And even on the whole land issue, you find that Bantu-speaking people tend to kind of have this superiority over the Khoi people in the whole debate. So, is my thinking wrong? Is it correct? What are your thoughts on that?
We are not answering now for free.
Thank you very much. I want to first comment on what this comrade just said with regards to tribalism. Tribalism might be a problem, in fact it is a problem in South Africa, but to consider it as a primary contradiction is a poor analysis of South Africa's sociological reality. the reality is that the economic disparity and economic disposition of primarily African people isn't a problem. The reason that the reality of African people being constrained in one area, be it Kukule, Chokali, Chonyanga, is a primary antagonism. No, I'm trying to give you perspective in terms of what you're trying to say with regards to tribalism. Tribalism can never be regarded, because in that bracket you can then regard World War II. World War II.
There's a panel, eh? There's a panel.
Alright.
So please, statement, comment, question.
I want to just clarify it. Yeah, I think that the problem of race dominance is not limited to interpersonal dynamics. I think the component of Stellenbosch did outline that. It is ingrained in the race question. There's the class question in South Africa, and the wealth distribution measures are ingrained in the race question. The people who are rich are white people. The people who are poor are primarily black people in this country. And the black people constitute the colored race, the Indian and the African people as per Igor's perspective. But in the same breath, we can never compare someone like the Guptas, for instance, as those who are marginalized, because they know the people who are marginalized in South Africa are the light-skinned black people, the Khoisan people, and the African people in particular. So I wanted to first clarify that type of antagonism in South Africa.
Comrade, question or comment?
Yeah, I'm going.
This is not, we're not delivering.
I want to first outline what I'm trying to say.
No. Please just give us your question or your statement.
Yeah, okay, can I speak? Okay, sure.
No. Your next word must be a question or a statement.
Yeah, it's speaking to the methodology of how we must achieve. Yeah, I must freak the preamble. I think that the transformation of the society can't be handled in a passive and liberal way. It must be attacked in a radical and fundamental way of changing the patterns of ownership and the patterns of those who influence society. Because the reality in South Africa is that those who are rich and white control the media. Those who are rich and white control the spaces of influence. Those who are rich and white control the basis of power. So the means of production are owned by white people in South Africa. And the narrative is that they just got that it was achieved through apartheid, it was achieved through colonization, and it must be reorganized in such a radical way. Because the violence and the genocide that was upon our people during colonization and apartheid can't be absorbed by mere bickering in a seminar. It must be attacked in a legislative way that says that those who don't have stuff, those who don't own must own things. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Please don't make statements. Can you?
No, I just firstly want to applaud the cater there for the wisdom which is provided. Second to that, now.
Let me explain something to you. No, hang on. Let me explain something to you. There's a very particular thing that goes behind who I have selected. There are two men who made comment, and it was opportunity for two women. There is no way. Then that's another conversation. So you will get an opportunity in the third round. Please comment. Everybody here has an opinion. Everybody here has an opinion, and everybody here thinks what they have to say is very important. Can I ask that you stand up? Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you. I asked the question I'm asking a liberal white woman who owns her racism. Firstly, I thank Asanda for starting me on that journey and teaching me about white privilege. You won't remember the conversation, but it was life-changing. And I have had the privilege of having read Robin's book already, so I come from that perspective. What I'm very interested to hear a little bit more about from the panel is I'm a long way on the journey. There's nothing special about me. But given the fact that I own my racism, what can I start to do with the power of the fact that I am a liberal white woman and that holds power? So what can I start to do with my power towards breaking down racism?
Thank you.
Thank you. I too, like Janet, also was started on my racism journey by a Sunday. At the outset, I do want to say, Dr. D'Angelo, that I was working on my laptop on making notes of what's been said here today. I have not done any other work. In fact, I've taken 5 hours off work today, and I'm self-employed, to be here, to write down what has been said. And whilst that may sound defensive, it is not meant to be. I'm simply saying that I'm not sitting here doing other work and not listening and not absorbing and typing up what is said. My question then is, as a white person, as a privileged white person who also has not yet got to the point of owning racism.
Guys, can we respect each other, please?
Of owning my racism, that there is a journey that I'm starting and that I want to take very seriously with the guidance from the people who know what I need to do and what I need to understand. The question which arose during Yari and I's discussion is, with the stigma attached to the liberal white woman, how does one avoid a situation where those people who, at least by referring to themselves as liberal, have started at least to try and take the tiny baby steps on this journey, for them to be encouraged rather than discouraged? Because I 100% agree with the previous question asker who said that it is the responsibility of white people, more than anyone, to take steps to combat racism. So that's my question.
Okay. Thank you very much to everybody that's asked the question. I'm going to hand over to the panel, and it's going to be freestyle. Anyone can respond to any question. But before I do that, I just have one thing that I want to put down, which is, I think one of the things that we have seen, that naming things is powerful, right? And that's why naming white fragility is powerful. So I think we need to start asking ourselves questions like, what is wrong with liberalism? Why is it being criticized? That's just the thing that I want to throw out there, and then the panel will, I'm sure, handle it.
So I'm going to do something uncomfortable, and I'm trying to lean into it because the last time I tried to do something uncomfortable, I had to ask a manager at a cafe to deal with it because I didn't want to face the violence of white people. I mean, she was a white owner, it was a cafe. But the first, and I assume because you've all made yourselves a white woman, to speak, when you were saying the words white, liberal, privileged, it felt like you were putting it through your teeth. Like it was a very uncomfortable thing, and it is not yet something that flows from self. And there was a defensiveness there that I felt, and I mean, I may be wrong, but I'm going to go with my authentic feelings. And then the second speaker, what you did there, second white woman speaker, was you acknowledged your defensiveness, but you didn't. So it was a kind of an overflexing of the good white. And it's very hard because there's a tiny voice, actually it's a very loud voice. It would be screaming at me to shut up because these white women will find you later. And please don't, because I have a white mother who does this work for you all the time. And I am done being manipulated by a white woman. But essentially, all I could think of when you were asking these questions was that you need to do your own labor. You were asking the panel, yes, panel's expertise, that kind of vibe, but ultimately you have to sit with yourself. And the hard thing is sitting with yourself and facing yourself. And it is difficult work because you are not going to like what you find. And I'm sure part of the reason you're here is because you didn't like what you found. But that's just the start. There's the rest of self. And you might find yourself protecting yourself under, the owning of this identity, owning the white liberal, and how do I use this and the way to move through the space. But that's just the beginning. The Band-Aid hasn't come off yet. And yeah, I think you really need to own that, just as much as I need to own my stuff all the time. You know, so I'm not denying it. But also that point on individualism. The request was that laptops be put away. And white women feel that, like when something is pointed out, that you felt that it resonated with you, which means there's a reason why it resonated with you. And you need to think about that. And I am trying not to apologize, and by not apologizing, I know that I'm apologizing technically, because I'm not trying to point out, I'm just using you as the example of what we need to start doing. We're not there yet if this is what we're doing in this space. This is just a scratch of the sort of conversation we need to be having if that is what you brought to the table.
I'd like to respond to the vehement defense of liberalism as a philosophical approach. I have no problem with it and what it stands for and its idealism. But in reality, from the perspective, from a critical realist perspective, liberalism doesn't apply in a situation where individual actors are not equal. So it assumes that we are all equal, we all treat each other equal, we have rights which are attributable to us actually through our property rights. So something that came to mind about whiteness as an experience is people pointing out to me that that's illegal. Right? And then without being critical about it, what is the history of the criminalization of dacha? It's because you couldn't get my ancestors to work as slaves. You had to bring in other people from other places of the world and then take away that cultural aspect, appropriate it, and then now come and try and sell it back to us and say, look, we found this wonderful miracle cure. It can cure anything. Yes, we know. So that type of exceptionalism is what my experience of whiteness is. People who, I mean, I'm not trying to say that I know more than the next person. But in an academic context where I'm the lecturer and I've experienced in these things, I'm the one telling you what to read. And then you still come and try to tell me, yeah, but this and but that. I appreciate debate, but let it come from from a position of informedness. Don't assume because your skin has melanin deficiency, you know everything or you know better than others. And I mean, that does apply to all people, but specifically in the South African context, and specifically here in Slaapstad. It's a different kettle of fish to the Eastern Cape. It's a different kettle of fish to Johannesburg. It's like Capetonian residents are still removed from the African reality of South Africa.
Is actually quite sick by that. I mean, I don't know. When you spoke about baby steps and what people can do. I mean, if you're struggling with a simple thing like shutting down your laptop because of how it might affect the black people in the room, and you feel that you have good justification for that, and you're struggling with that. I mean, I don't know what you're going to do out of this room. I mean, it's a simple thing. It's not about what actually, do you know that before you spoke, we said exactly what you're going to say, and you said exactly what we expected you to say. Okay, all right. And then the other question of what you can do. What you can do, for example, in this situation, is help her shut her laptop down.
So, intentions and impact are two different things, and intentions don't excuse impact. So we have to let go of our intentions, and we have to think about the impact. So clearly for some folks, there's things going on in the room that you don't understand, right? And so you may feel falsely accused of something. And this is where humility comes in. That there are folks who you can grant have more understanding than you do. Not complete, not finished. And so there's something you're missing. So you tell yourself, wow, what am I missing? I don't understand why that was a problem. I don't understand why my innocent act is problematic. But people are telling me that it's problematic, and so maybe I'm missing something rather than they have done something unjust and inaccurate, okay? So this leads to, I mean, the number one question I get when I give a talk from white people is, okay, now what do I do? And often with that kind of attitude, right? Okay, I get it, now what do I do? And I want to challenge that question and then maybe give you a more sincere answer to it. I want to challenge it because I think it's actually a disingenuous question. In my experience, most white people in this room are going to do nothing different as a result of this time except continue being nice. I mean, and I hope that offends you that I said that so that you prove me wrong. But part of being white is that, you know, we can just go, that was interesting, and then just carry on, right? But if you make that choice, and as many of the white people will make that choice, then I would like you to do something for me. I would like you to go home and look in the mirror and look at yourself straight in the eyes and say, I choose to collude with white supremacy. And then carry on, but let's do it with honesty, right? Because most of us are not going to do anything different, all right? What would you do about anything that you found a remotely of interest and you wanted to find out more about? What would you do? Google the shit out of it, okay? Google it. So what I want to offer back to white people whose question is, what do I do? Is it's 2019, how have you managed not to know? How have you managed not to know when they've been telling us forever? When the information's everywhere, right? It takes effort not to know and not to see. It's a willful kind of ignorance, a refusal to know, okay? So, honestly, for a lot of white people, just breaking with the apathy of our certitude, our complacency, is to look it up. My website alone is filled with 10 things white people can do, 18 things white people can do. I would highly recommend Layla Saeed. She's a black woman. I would recommend her book, Me and White Supremacy Workbook. Work through that workbook, right? It's all out there. And take out a piece of paper and actually write down why you don't know. And you'll have your map. Nothing on that map will be easy, but everything on that map can be addressed.
So it's in response to what can be done. So apologies to those who are not Afrikaans machtig. Don't be a doos, be lekker.
Okay, so we're doing the last round. There's still, hang on guys, there's still the question around feminism that still has not been answered. I'm aware that it will be in this round. And then there's still the question about what needs to happen radically, systematically, in order for us to end racism, which we haven't quite dealt with. So if I can just see a show of hands. No, I don't have to recognize you, eh? I don't have to. So, can we see the hands in the room? Okay, no, I'm seeing the hands. I have to think about who is given a voice and how. That's why I want to see the hands, and then I'll tell you who's going to be given a platform. Okay, so yes ma'am, yes ma'am, yes ma'am, and yes sir. Okay, there's also a question of tribalism. And I also just want to add, guys, this is a panel. We have X number of hours. Not every question that you have will be answered. And if it is, it will not necessarily be answered to the extent that you would like it to. We have an entire hour of lunchtime. So if there's somebody that's on the panel that you want to grab, that you want to get the depth of the answer that you want, please feel free to do that. And this is not to say your question will be answered, but it's just to say, please be aware. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Who are the people? Yes. Where's the mics?
Hi, thank you to the panel. I just, to further the conversation on what we can do, I think as South Africans, probably a lot of the world, but especially in South Africa, we don't like to be wrong. There's a lot of pride that we associate with ourselves. So I think step one is put that pride away and get ready to be wrong. Get ready to be wrong and to try and overcome that. And that's step one. But that pride thing, Alexander Pope wasn't wrong when he said it's the never failing vice of fools. So let's get over that.
Hi, so going back to Leon's point about white people leaving the space comfortable, I'm noticing for myself as a white person in this space how humor is used to kind of make me feel comfortable and in like a weird way, and that feels uncomfortable. And I just wondered in terms of like strategies of how to talk to, as a white person talking to other white people about race, yeah, your experiences of using humor or not and when it is and isn't appropriate and that kind of thing.
The last one somewhere, right at the back. Just pass it on, right there.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much for the session. And I have to admit, it feels good to be listened by white people. So my first point of affirmation, Raz, thank you very much for being unapologetic yourself, especially in the institution which you teach. Ma'am, Dr. Robin, is your ideology of discourse or your intellectual mannerism, which I strongly believe you have insulated in your book, informed by white guilt or by white privilege? That's the first question. The second question that I'm probing to the rest of the white population in this space, how does it feel to be a white person, especially knowing that with whiteness, there's economic supremacy that is attached to this skin color, which is whiteness. And lastly, do white people in this room think that black people should be given the land back in the country?
Okay. Thank you. I think first thing we should even be discussing this. What we should be discussing now is where is the land being given back and how. That's the thing we should be discussing. Second to that, on the issue of, I heard the remarks of people of color. I'm not a person of color. I'm a black person and I'm black and proud. Second to that, a mic was taken from me and given to a white person who wanted to play games on a laptop. I'm experiencing favoritism just here in this place. Okay, to let that slide. On the issue like how racism should be dealt with, it wouldn't help to have seminars, white people have conversation. That doesn't help because they're going to speak nice here because of the cameras. When they are in secret places, then they start doing all the things which they usually do. The best way to deal with racism is through violence. If a person is racist to you, then you must retaliate with violence. Thank you.
I think that we are not in South Africa until we evoke violence as a response, right? So we shouldn't, guys, this is the country that we live in. It was built by violence and it will continue to be violent. So I think I want to, if you allow me, comrade, not my comrade, I think I want to tweak your question a little bit and maybe say, what kind of structural violence can we as black people respond with, right? When we are visited by violence, in order for people to be aware that what they've just done is actually structurally violent, how do we make people aware that although you haven't cut me, you haven't punched me, but you have actually violated me by your statement or your actions? So I'm going to tweak it a little bit if you don't mind. I'm going to head over to the panel, and then when the panel is done, Edwin is going to come and do a close for us. I just want to say thank you so much to everybody for bringing yourselves fully, the difficult and the not so difficult parts. Okay.
All right, I think I spoke to white feminism. I think there's white feminism. I think white women use feminism as a way not to look at racism, and through that, they're centering their own issues. I do want to speak to the humor. So I do use humor, and it is a strategy that I use. I'm aware of it. I use it strategically. That does not mean that it will be an effective strategy for everyone. I'm very clear about that. I never mean to be glib or dismissive. There's a phrase that comedians use, punching up rather than down. I am on some level kind of making fun of this nonsense of whiteness, the way that white people were ridiculous in so many ways. And if we can laugh at ourselves, one, it relieves tension. So because we start to shut down, there's a cognitive distance when we're being challenged in ways we haven't been challenged before. We can begin to shut down, and the laughter can release some of that tension and keep us in the conversation. It can also cause us to not take ourselves so seriously. If I can laugh at that part of myself, rather than get defensive about it, I might be able to move forward more. And I recognize that for some black people, white people laughing about racism, even if we're laughing about ourselves, can be painful. So I want to acknowledge that. Again, it's very hard to get any strategy right by everyone, but this is what's my intention behind it. Great question, white privilege or white guilt, because I'm sitting here thinking about that. I recognize that not everyone knows themselves, right? But I sincerely don't believe white guilt motivated me, except to the degree that my recognition that I have participated and do participate in the oppression of other people. When I know oppression myself, it is not the same, but I grew up in poverty, I grew up with deep class shame, and when I realized that I was actually colluding with somebody else's oppression, that was not acceptable to me. That's a key piece that drives me. A key piece is also having built relationships and having seen the pain that this causes to people that I know and love, and that's not acceptable to me. So certainly the white privilege gave me the ability to write this book. I might have grown up in poverty, but being white helped me through it, helped me go to college, and help me be able to develop the skills to articulate what I have come to understand. So those are my thoughts on that question.
Yeah. Anybody else on the panel? Okay, guys, okay. Adrian.
I will answer that one. Good afternoon again. We have reached the end of such a wonderful day. I think what has happened here is phenomenal in the sense that, number one, don't run, you must listen, brother, you must hear my response to the land. Number one, white people are not used to be addressed by a white person on their white fragility. Their guilt, their so-called pain of having all this wealth and comfort, that they are struggling to know how to deal with it. How do I do it? If somebody asks the question, is white people going away from these conversations comfortable? If you listen to the questions, they are not. They are struggling with this. We need them to struggle with this because we have been in the struggle long enough and alone. We need them to be part of the struggle because they hold the keys to our land. And not land with compensation, I'm talking about land without compensation. I've also heard the story about, but we bought the tractors, we built new houses. Let me just give you an analogy. If you steal my car, and you put in a sound system, when the cops come, you think I'm going to let you get your sound system. So just on that topic, I'd like to say, the land is coming back whether you like it or not. The research is showing that we cannot continue on the status quo. And that people of color, if you want to be known as that, or whether you are calling yourself black, have had enough. 25 years of talking is more than enough. Now we need to move to action. And Wilhelm Verwoerd, I'm using Wilhelm everywhere I speak because I think he's so inspirational as the grandson of Hendrik Verwoerd, who started this whole apartheid regime. And what Wilhelm Verwoerd said, as a white person living in South Africa, you cannot live comfortably with more than 13% of what you own. 87% of what white people own should go back to black people in South Africa. And I support that. I think hopefully the 13% is enough so that you don't have to start more squatter camps, which we have been accustomed to for a very long time. On our panel, I'd like to say thank you very much for Robin DiAngelo, coming all the way from the USA to address us tonight. I would like to meet more insiders in the white race to join us in this conversation. We need people in South Africa. It's ridiculous that we have to bring somebody from the States to talk for us. But when we say it, it's not qualified enough. So I hope you heard it from her today. I will still challenge all the white ladies, majority. White males, you may also do this if your wife is not coming to the conversation. Pillow talk is for transformation, moving from this point forward. I want to say to Tumi, to Hein, to Nix and Asanda, and everybody that contributed to today, I think we have just entered a space of revolution. I think the things that we discussed here, whether it was uncomfortable or not, and white people, I am grateful that you came here. I am grateful. And it's not because of I'm trying to submit to my bosses. I'm long beyond that point. I do not submit. I do not expect them to pay my way in life. I do not expect them to put food on my table. Their old clothes and their old food is not what drives me every day. But what drives me is that I have 2 children in South Africa growing up, and they will not grow up in a country and have the struggles that I have. So when white people show up in their droves like they did today, I say thank you because I need you in order to transform this country. Whether we like it or not, whether they are privileged, whether they are born guilt or shame, we still need them to transform this country. So we say thank you for coming out and sitting through this discomfort. Everybody, I will ask you now, yes, thank you very much. And on a final note, I want to say, let's go outside, let's continue the struggle, and let's continue supporting each other. It doesn't matter where we're doing it. Support, support, support. Because at the end of the day, if you think you are internalizing your struggle, nobody can see your internal struggle. Speak up, white people, on public platforms, so that other white people can see that there is a problem. We are the problem, and this is how we move forward. Thank you very much, and we are adjourned for life.